Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and welcome back to another Sunday Sew Along. We are in part two of the Style Arc Spencer woven pants, and today we are going to start sewing. Today we're going to be working on the back of our pants, more specifically that welt pocket there in the back and getting that tackled. So that's what we'll be doing today. So if you have any questions, please leave them down below. I'm happy to answer those as quickly as possible. Also, if you like this type of content, would like to help support the channel, I do have a Ko-fi account that's linked down below. It's a virtual tip jar, and anything I pull out of that just goes right back into the channel with, supplies, maintenance of equipment, lights, all that kind of stuff. Software helps me maintain all of those type of things for the channel, which are really helpful in these more educational type videos. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. Good luck making the backs of your pants, and I'll see you again next week for our fronts.
All right, so today we are starting with our backs. Now, in all honesty, you could, this week and next week, you could flip-flop. It doesn't really matter. We're going to be constructing our backs, and then we'll do our fronts, but you could easily do it the other way. It's just whatever your preference is. I just decided to start with the backs. So these are the pieces we are going to need for today. We are going to need our backs, oddly enough. I have marked, as I showed you, the welt pocket placement on the right side of the right side of the fabric, but also the right side of the pants. So my pocket, I'm only putting one in, and it's going to be on the right side. And then I've gone ahead, I've interfaced the part where my pocket's going to be, and I've gone ahead and marked my darts in so I can easily see where those are. The other pieces, because we're going to be putting that welt pocket in today, that we are going to need are our welt, which is just a rectangle of fabric that's been interfaced on the wrong side. And then we need our pocket bag, which I cut out of just cotton lawn. And then our pocket bearer, which is the back part of the pocket that I cut out of self fabric. So those are the pieces we are going to be using today. But before we get started, I'm actually going to set those welt pieces or the pocket pieces aside for just a second. Let's do a couple of prep things. So I'm going to go to the ironing board and I'm going to press my welt in half lengthwise, this way, and give it a really good press. And then I am also going to finish my seam allowances. So I'm going to use a serger, but you don't have to. You can use an overlock stitch or overcast stitch on your sewing machine. You could do a zigzag. However you're wanting to finish off your seam allowances is fine. But I'm going to go ahead and serge my crotch seam, my center back crotch seam, and then my side seams, and then also my inseams all the way down. So I'm going to go ahead and do that as well. So let me do those steps, do all my, all of my serging, and then press my welt in half, wrong sides together. So it'll be right side out. And then I'll meet you back here. Okay, once I have everything prepped, I have my welt pressed wrong sides together, and my backs are, those seams are all serged. Now be very careful, you don't want to trim off any of the actual fabric. I mean, if you're, kind of trimming off the little hairs that sometimes come when fabric starts to unravel, like these little bitty hairs, that kind of come off, that's fine. But you want to try and not trim anything off when you're doing those because you don't want to make your pants smaller than they need to be. So the two legs have now been done. So we're going to do a couple of things now. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give myself kind of a guideline stitch, and I'm going to sew the open edge of my welt shut, this long edge. Now, Style Arc patterns show your seam allowance. So you can see the dotted line is my sewing line. So this has, I know because I measured, that's a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to go to the machine and sew it 3/8 of an inch all the way down this long edge. And again, it's basically I'm sewing that closed, but it'll also work as a really good reference. And I'm using a contrasting thread so you guys can see. Obviously, you want to use matching thread, and that makes sewing a welt pocket so much easier when you've got a matching thread. So let me quickly just sew that guideline, and then we'll do our darts. Okay, so I've got my welt all pressed. You can see that contrasting thread. That's at 3/8 of an inch. The fold is down here and the raw edge is up there. So it's 3/8 of an inch from that raw edge. All right, I'm gonna set this aside for a minute. And we need to sew our darts real quick. So I am going to, and I marked those in if you recall. Well, I'll do one on camera. You don't need to see me do both of them. All right, so we'll do the one that has the interfacing. All right, so I'm just gonna fold my dart legs together. And I'm just putting a pin in either side to make sure those are lined up well. And then I'm gonna stick one right here at the point. Okay, so now I can go to the machine and I'll take you with me and we're gonna sew our dart real quick. So let's go do that. All right, so I've got my 2 pins that are in there. And again, I've marked these in just to make it easier for you guys to see. I don't often mark in my dart legs. I just eyeball them, but I wanted to make this as easy as possible for you guys to see. So I have chalked those in, which you can totally chalk those in if you're not comfortable with eyeballing. So I'm just gonna sew along this chalk line. And I did make sure that my dart legs were matching up. And then when I get to the tip of the dart, I'm about 1 needle width away from the fold. I'm just going to raise my presser foot, turn it around on itself, and I'm going to start sewing back right along the fold of the fabric from the dart, about, I don't know, an inch or so, and then back stitch. So you see, I go right down to that fold, and then I sew back up along that fold, and then back stitch in the bulk of the dart. All right, the next thing we are going to want to do is we want to open up our darts and we want to press our darts towards center back. So we're going to press those both towards center back, and then I'll come back and we are going to put in our welt. Okay, so let's put this welt pocket in. Obviously, I'm just putting my, well, not obviously, I am just putting it in on the right side, as in, you know, right and left side of my body, right side of my body. But you could do this on both. That's fine. You'll just need to mark it in both spots. So it's up to you. When you do your dart, it is going to distort the fabric a little bit, you know, because we've pulled in a little bit, and you know that's meant to go over the bum. So there's going to be a little bit of distortion, just a little bit there. That's okay. We are mostly concerned with our points that are here. Now the lines come in handy when we're sewing our especially the welt part of it in, but really we just care about the points. We want those points to make sure that they're matching up. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our little welt piece and we are going to line, and this is also the reason that I extend past those 4 points. We are going to line up the welt right along that bottom edge. Okay. So I'm matching my stitching line here up with that chalk line on either side, and we want to center it. So I have about 3/8 of an inch. It doesn't have to be perfect. We'll just make sure both sides match, but I just want to make sure that I've got about 3/8 of an inch on either side. Um, and that's right about correct. Now you can put pins here. I don't. But if you feel better about that, pins just can distort things sometimes. So it's up to you. So now we're going to take this and, well, I'll put a pin in just as we're moving it. Just like so. Okay, let's go to the machine and let's sew our welt down. All right, just as a reminder, we're working on the right side, as in the correct side of the fabric, not the wrong side of the fabric, but the right side of the fabric. All right, we are just going to sew this welt down from point to point. So we want to stop right where we have this line that goes perpendicular to the, right? Yeah, perpendicular to the line that we're sewing. So hopefully that makes sense. And if you want to draw it in with chalk, just so you know for sure, I'm just going to eyeball it, but you can take your ruler and really make a good cross point there where you know exactly where to start. But I'm just going to eyeball this. And again, our chalk will go away. Now this is a little hard to do with a camera in the way, but there we go. All right, and now the goal is that we're going to stitch right along that previous stitch line until we get to the other end. And you want to lock your stitch at the beginning and at the end. So whether that's a back stitch or a locking stitch, whatever that looks like. And then when we get to this end, as soon as I get parallel or perpendicular to that, perpendicular to this line that's going this way, as soon as I hit that, I'm going to lock my stitch. Okay, so, oh, got a long thread there. So I've got, 3/8 of an inch on either side that is not sewn down. And when you lift it up, it should be ending right at that cross mark. This really isn't that hard. Okay, so that's good to go. So now our next step is that we want to take our pocket bag. I want to make sure that it's that we're keeping it correct. We're going to take our pocket bag, and this should match up perfectly widthwise with your welt. Okay. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to sew over that line that we just sewed. Now, this is where I do a little bit of cheating. I am going to pin this in place loosely, far away from where I'm actually stitching though. Really want to make sure that that is lined up nicely, because I'm going to flip it over so that I can see my stitching line. Now, we do want to make sure that everything is lying flat, and it should be. Yeah, I think everything looks pretty good. But just kind of do you want to make sure that nothing got turned over on itself or turned upside down. I'm just going to drop my needle right in that spot. So right where I started or stopped last time. And we're just going to sew right over that previous stitch line again. When I get to the end, back stitch. Okay, now let's look at it. So we've just stitched right along that same line. So we flip it back over just to make sure everything looks okay. That looks really good. So we still have, our 3/8 of an inch on either end there as well. Okay, my pant leg is not wanting to stay up there. Okay, so now we can remove those. Okay, so next we are going to actually understitch this. So I'm going to pull this flat. And so there's my welt, and my welt's still pointing the wrong way. But I am going to start, you don't have to go all the way to the edge. Just start inside. You don't want to sew down your seam allowances. So start somewhere in the middle there. And I am understitching the pocket bag to that welt. So I'm just kind of pulling those seams apart, stitching about, a 1/16 of an inch. That's just going to keep this piece rolling out of the pocket when you're wearing it. So trust me, when that is all turned inside really nicely, that's going to keep that. Okay, so now we're just going to pull it out of the way again. So it'll bubble up, but that's okay. All right, next we are going to take our pocket bearer, which is this piece. Set those pieces aside. And you can kind of play around. Yeah, so this is bigger, like it goes past, but this will be important and you'll see why in a second. So right sides together, we are now going to line up. And I'm actually going to line up the raw edge of this pocket bearer with that stitching line right there, because that puts me right at about where I need to be with my 3/8 of an inch. Now, we could definitely go in and draw in your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance in there. That's completely up to you. I know where that hits on this presser foot. So what we also need to make note, in fact, let me just get chalk. Hold on. Okay, I think this is going to help make this easier for you to see what I'm talking about. All right, so I've marked in my 3/8 of an inch seam allowance here on the pocket bearer part. And this is right side. This is the wrong side of the pocket bearer. This is the right side of the pocket bearer. And I've also gone ahead and marked my cross where I need to start and stop as well. And I just looked at where I started and stopped on this and then made that note. And I'm wanting my raw edges to be matched up on either end. So hopefully, so that everything ends up really well. Okay. And we could also make sure that this line that we drew, that it is lined up with our line under here, which is starting to fade a little bit, and then our line under here, which are those lines that we marked in before. So now I just want to start right at that crosshair. And now I'm just going to sew right along that chalk line until we get to the other crosshair. Okay, so I stitched from that crosshair all the way to that crosshair right along that chalk line like so. Okay, we will not do any understitching on this side. What we are going to do next is pull all the seam allowance, and I mean the seam allowance of the pocket bag, the pocket bearer, and the welt. We want to pull that all aside. I need to go get scissors, and we're going to cut into our welt. So let me go get scissors and we will cut into this. Okay, so again, we're going to pull the seam allowances of everything aside until we can see just the pants. And we're going to be cutting just into your back of your pant. And I'm just going to take my scissors and cut a little starting point there. Then I can get my scissors in there. And we're just going to cut right up the middle. Now, make sure you don't have anything under there that you don't want under there. And just like with any other welt, we're going to kind of cut up until we get to about, I don't know, a 1/2 of an inch away from the end, which is the end of our box, which you can just barely see right there. And I'm going to cut a V. So I'm going to cut right to, but not through the stitching on that side. And then go up and cut to, but not through the stitching on that side. Now, we may, once we've pushed everything through, we might have to go through and clip just a little bit more into that. Sometimes that happens if you're getting puckers there at the pocket, but that should be good. Okay, now we're just going to do the same thing on the other end. Cut to about 1/2 of an inch. or so. Cut 2, but not through the stitching there. Cut 2, not through the stitching there. Okay, so now we've got a hole in our pants. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take all of our pieces and we're going to shove them to the wrong side of the pant. And even our little edges here, those all get shoved inside the pant. We'll sew that down. So if you're like, oh my gosh, there's a raw edge, it just gets tucked in. Just tuck her in. Okay. And then we're just going to fiddle with it a little bit. But basically, this is what, I mean, it's basically your welt. Right, like this. So I'm just going to go to the ironing board and I'm just going to press everything because obviously this looks awful right now. But get everything a press and make sure that all of your little bits and pieces are tucked in nicely. Got some rogue threads there that need to be trimmed. You just want to tuck everything in there and give it a really good press from this side. And then from the wrong side, we want this pocket bearer piece to be up like so. And then our bottom piece, you want to press it nice down so that when it is laid on top of each other, they should be, once everything's pressed, pretty even all the way around. Now, if they're not completely even, that's okay. We're not going to worry too much about that, but that's kind of the idea, okay? So press it really good on the wrong side, and then on the right side, we're going to give it a really good press and kind of fiddle around with it until it looks, you know, nice and crisp the way you want it, all right? So let's go give it a good press, and then meet me back here, and we'll finish sewing it up. Okay, so once everything's pressed, and that's all I did to this, folks. I didn't even have to clip into anything. You can still see my chalk marks faintly. I think I mentioned that a little damp cloth will take care of that, so we're not going to worry about that. But your welt should fill that little area nicely. Sometimes it just takes some practice. You know, you want to press this seam, you know, press this part away, and just give those corners a really good press. If you are noticing some puckering in your corners, you can clip into them just a little bit. Just be very careful. Use very sharp scissors that are very sharp at the point for that. But now we are going to close up our pocket. So obviously this is the right as in the correct side. It's both the right as in right and left and the right as in the correct side of the fabric. So what we are going to do now is we are going to take our pant and we're going to lift up this side here, and we should have this little triangle that we cut out. And then our pocket pieces, we've got the pocket bearer down here, then our pocket lining, and this little triangle that's right here. I am now going to go to the machine, and I'll take you with me, and we're going to start here at the top, and we're going to sew really close to that fold line that we created when we pressed, which should be about 3/8 of an inch. And we're just going to sew the pocket all the way around, and then we'll make it, you know, go all the way around. And then when we make it back up to this side, we'll come around and make sure that we've sewn this triangle down as well as we come up the other side. Okay, so let's go to the machine and let's sew this pocket together. All right, so there's my little triangle there. We're just going to start up here at the top part of the pocket. Be careful not to catch, you know, you're only sewing pocket pieces, but I'm sewing right along that crease that was created when I pressed my pocket. And now we're going to sew down. Now, my raw edges aren't matching up perfectly. That's okay. I'll show you how we're going to finish those off. And it's better that the pocket lays the way that the pocket wants to lay. Like I'm taking a big seam allowance down here at the bottom. And then again, this is, the pocket is like so. I'm pulling that front piece away. You do want to make sure you're catching all of your layers, but don't worry if you're having to take a bigger seam allowance through this pocket area. Chances are you're not even really going to use this pocket. So, I mean, maybe you'll throw a phone in there, but... And we come up and sew that other little triangle down. Okay, so see, our triangle has been sewn down there. We just want to make sure that we caught all of our pocket pieces on that side. We did. And then our little triangle has been sewn down here as well, all the way around. Okay, so we look at the right side again. And now our welt pocket is secure. So our next thing that we're going to do, let me come back over. All right, so here's the right side of our pants. The next thing we want to do is I want to finish off the seam allowance for this pocket, and I'm going to use a serger. You could pink it if you wanted to, your zigzag stitch, whatever you want to do. I'm going to do a serger, so I'll just be serging off each of the edges. And I'm just going to be really careful, and I'm doing all 4 edges because this top edge is also free. So you should be able to get that through a serger. If you can't, if it's too tight for your serger, just some pinking shears are fine, or just the zigzag stitch on your machine. So I'm just going to really quickly finish off all 4 edges, and I'm going to trim any discrepancy that's there on that pocket bag, and I'll meet you right back here. All right, so here's my finished pocket bag. This is what it looks like on the inside of my pants. Now, I am lining my pants, so it doesn't really matter what the inside of my pants look like because this will be covered by lining. But if you're not lining them, you do want to make sure that this seam allowances are finished off. Otherwise, you will get some fraying. Now, I did go ahead and serge mine because my fabric is fraying a little. Well, it's not now that it's serged, but the top parts, as you can see up here, are starting to fray. So I want to make sure that that stays nice and secure so I can wear these pants for a really long time. So even though they're lined, I went ahead and finished these off. If you're not lining your pants, and you are using a serger, just tuck in those serger ends back into the stitching to keep them nice and secure, because this pocket will be rubbing up against your body as you move, and you don't want those to unravel as time goes. So yeah, just serge off and then tuck those ends back in for each of the corners. So there we go. That's all been serged off, really nice and neat. So that is the back, and that is the front. Okay. All right. Now, the final thing we're going to do today for the backs of our pants is that we are going to sew our crotch seam here. So we just need our pant backs, right sides together, and we're going to be sewing this at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, which is the seam allowance indicated on the pattern. Just pop a couple pins in. Okay, so let's go sew this up really quick, and then we'll go from there. All right, let's sew these center backs at 3/8 of an inch. And now we have our center back seam sewn. Now, I know that, in fact, the instructions of this even say the same thing, to wait and do this seam once you've sewn your front and backs together so that you can sew the crotch seam in like one fell swoop up to the front. I hate doing it that way, especially with a fly. Now, if I had a side zip or a back zip, or if these were pull-on pants, I would consider doing it that way. I don't notice a difference. I know that some people say that, it's the bulk and how the seam lies. I just don't notice a difference. And I find it much easier to sew by sewing the backs and then sewing the fronts and then sewing the inseams in one fell swoop. So that's why I'm doing it this way. It is kind of just my preference. But obviously you can follow the instructions the way that they have, finished this seam off at the very end if you'd like. Also, I did a grown-on fly as opposed to a sew-on fly, so my instructions are already different in the crotch anyway. But there you have it. All right, so what I'm going to do now is go and press my seams open, which we can do because we use small seam allowances. 3/8 of an inch should be fine, and that curve should press open really nicely. If it were like a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you would need to trim some off. And then lastly, I think I'm going to go ahead and press my fold lines. So on the pattern, there are two main fold lines. You've got this one and this one. Don't bother with this. This is just the hem allowance that they added up for some reason. What we're going to do once our pants are completely done, we're going to serge off or finish off the bottom of the pant. We're going to fold them to the wrong side and stitch that down. So we'll stitch it down like, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch or so away. And then at this fold line, it's going to get pressed up so it'll cover that stitching line, and then we'll tack it in place because these pants have cuffs. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense on how we're going to do that. So I'm just going to go and press my legs up at this one to the wrong side, and then press them at this one to the right side, just so I have some memory creases to keep in mind when I sew my legs together. You don't have to do this step. You can wait and press this once the pant legs are put together. I just find this a little bit easier to have that memory crease. So completely up to you. So I'm going to go do that real quick, and then I'll meet you back here to say goodbye. Okay, we're going to stop for today, but let's go over everything that we have done. We have this is the wrong side of the pant, obviously. We have our welt pocket in. I have that center back seam pressed open. And then here at the hem, you'll notice I've not finished off the raw edge here at the hem yet. We'll do that once the legs are sewn together. I just wanted to press and give myself memory. So if I unfold all of this, you'll see all of my memory creases that have been folded in. So I folded it, actually per the pattern, it gets folded up 3¼ inches up to the wrong side. And then on the right side, you then fold it up 2 inches. So this stitching line that you will be able to see from the right side, but it will be covered up by the cuff when all is said and done. Okay? So that is everything. That is the wrong side of the pant. And then the right side of the pant, we have got our welt here on the right side. I still need to hit the chalk marks with a little water, but we've got our darts in and we're all ready to go. So now our backs are all ready to go. We can set those aside, and next week we will tackle our fronts, which will include the slash pockets, the zip fly, and then we'll finish sewing the fronts up. We'll press the cuffs and all of that, and then we will go ahead actually next week and attach our front and back together, and then they will be ready for lining, and that will be the following week. Will be a separate how to line a pair of pants tutorial, so with a fly, and so that will be the next week, and then the following week we will finish everything up. All right, I hope that makes sense. Leave me any questions you've got in the comments below. I'll answer those as soon as possible, and I will see you guys next week.